If you consider yourself a sports fan and you've listened to sports radio, you have heard my guest on the airwaves. It is Dave Shore, a national sports broadcaster. We're going to look at his life here on the On to Something podcast. I'm Bryan Fenley, run through key elements of his career, but also learn what he's like outside of his career, outside of broadcasting, what he's doing now, and get sort of the full picture of who he is, really bringing out the human element of Dave Shore and what drives him and how he thinks. And this is the On to Something podcast. I'm Bryan Fenley with Fox Sports Radio and doing live events. Now, Dave, welcome you on here. And yesterday, we taped this on Friday, June 3rd. Yesterday was Lou Gehrig Day. And obviously, you being the COO of the ALS Association chapter in North Carolina, how has ALS impacted you and why you're so compelled to do something about it?
Yeah, well, Bryan, it's great being on with you, and thank you for asking that, because that's really kind of the most important is the why. Why did I spend over 30 years in sports media, and then all of a sudden I'm running a nonprofit in North Carolina? Because very early in my career, my television career, my mom passed away from ALS. It was a very short battle for her, and it was back in the early 90s when we didn't have the ALS Association. We had the Muscular Dystrophy Association that was able to help her. So I was only able to see it from that level, and then volunteer and do the Jerry Lewis telethon for the TV stations I was with in the following years, but never more than just volunteer. So now you come full circle, and I'm able to be a chief operating officer, and those sports connections really help, because there's an amazing amount of sports connections that are involved with ALS. There's a 2 times more likely chance that someone who played in the NFL or professional football or maybe even soccer is going to develop ALS. And they don't know why, but that's one of the reasons why researchers are working so hard on that. The same reason why 2 times more of a chance that a veteran who served for our country may develop that. So they're trying to find out those reasons. But you mentioned Lou Gehrig. He's obviously the most famous name associated with ALS. And now I think it's amazing that baseball, and it took a little while, but we were able to get the attention of MLB. And so now he's the 3rd athlete that is recognized with their own day, along with Jackie Robinson and Roberto Clemente, to have their own day recognized, not just once, but annually.
By you doing this now, it seems to me that it is a cathartic way of recognizing your mom every day. How old were you when you first saw that she was impacted by this?
Well, I think I was just in my mid-20s, and so, I mean, literally, she only was diagnosed and survived the next year and a half. And that is what we hear from many of the patients that get it. Some will have slow progression, and others will have very quick, and she had very quick. So, I really didn't see much of a change in her, because I was living in another city and working early on in my career, and didn't get a chance to see those early signs. But I did, in visiting, get to see the quick demise and some of the things that you had to overcome early on. And, we've made some strides, obviously, in the years since then, but there's a long way to go, because when there's something that you face that has no cure, you don't like that. That's like never being able to celebrate a win. We have no wins to ever celebrate, other than just having maybe a good fundraiser that will help possibly create some more money, like the Ice Bucket Challenge did 7 years ago, so that you can then make sure that there's going to be some great research being done, and hopefully someday a cure.
What your mom had was strength. And as we transition to your career in broadcasting, you need to be sort of strong-natured to weather through the highs and lows that come with making it in this business. How do you feel like, when you look at your career, and I know we'll get a little bit more specific into it as we continue this conversation, do you feel like your journey in the world of sportscasting was a way, Dave, to try and make your mom proud?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think, maybe of anything, is that she taught me to do what you want to do, but do it right. Do something that was going to make a difference. And I think that, when I tell people that, early on when I was a kid, there was just something about being a reporter, being very curious, asking people, why are you doing this? How's that made? How's that done? Especially in a day and age when, there was no internet. So, you just had to talk to people. So I was always curious. I always wanted to be a reporter. And then, once you get into sports, you realize how insignificant on the local news sometimes sports is compared to the news and weather. So then I decided, you know what, maybe I better be in sports media, so that on sports talk radio, so we can spend it 24/7 talking sports. But yeah, it always started out with just that intrigue of wanting to be a reporter, being the insider on things, and hopefully being a good conduit between the viewer and the world, whether it be sports or news.
Being a good insider involves having good relationships and developing trust. You have a humongous network. You've developed that trust. In terms of that being a launch pad for your career in relationships and staying on people's good sides, how do you feel like that played a role in the way in which your career manifested and would grow?
Well, I think that's a good question. And I tell young people this many, many times. I think that we can all make mistakes, but it's very costly in our business if you're going to make a mistake that will hurt your credibility in any way. And I think that was the key, was that I learned early on from some of the people that taught me is just do not ever compromise your credibility, whether it be with your sources. And I'm not just saying, I'm not going to tell you who my source is. They're unnamed. I'm talking about when you're actually dealing with that person, that you're true to them, that you're honest with them. Hey, I'm going to go with this. Are you saying this? Can I go with this? And, you're just upfront with them. And I think that was the most important thing and a lot of people think, well, in sports, how often does that happen? But it's amazing to me over the years of stories that I worked on or whatever, just how many really deep stories you were going to get that you found out that were exclusives.
Not only deep stories, but you have been in moments of games where it's been the story of the night in the sports world, your time with the Lakers and beyond with ESPN. And how does your brain function in the sense, Dave, that right after the game ends, you got to ask the right questions?
Yeah.
And when you come out of a post-game interview, you would with the likes of Kobe and others, what to you, in looking back at one of those interviews, would say, I hit on the questions that I needed to, I'm satisfied with what I did? Where do you find the basis of what you are looking for at the core when it comes to the formulation of questions like that?
Well, first of all, this is why I like these type of podcasts, Bryan, because, you can get a little deep on these kind of things. There's no time limit. And those are really good questions and thought-provoking topics that you're going after. So I think that, I think at the time I always thought, as they rush you out on the court, if you're a sideline reporter like I was, and, the PR person says, here's who you're going to get, and they pull them over really quickly, my first instinct was to just ask whatever I thought the fan sitting at home watching on TV or listening on radio was going to want to know right away. What were those three questions that decided the game that they're going to want to know? The hard part is, especially when I was a sideline reporter, was filtering in my brain some of the things that I heard in the huddle that I would just love to tell people right now, but I probably really shouldn't, because I'll need to do a little bit more exploring. For example, you'll hear me talk many times about him. I love Kobe Bryant. I mean, he was so upstanding in what he did, and we had such a great relationship that I still miss him every day. But I remember when Mike Brown took over in the not so ceremoniously popular thing of having to follow Phil Jackson in Los Angeles. I remember some of those moments where, the Laker players would walk away from the huddle, and Kobe would turn to a couple of the guys and say, we're not running that play. We're going to run this one. And that didn't get referred to by me in a sideline report or an interview after the game, but it did get filed away when I would be talking about the problems that the Lakers were having as an insider covering the Lakers. Then I could put in perspective that, these guys just aren't on the same page. So there's a really fine line of what you're filing away for later, what you're filing away for perspective, and then what you need to ask right now.
That fine line, like you said, of doing your job, but also preserving relationships. Is that barometer, that fine line, is that developed over time where you get the sensibility to say, more so with experience, okay, I can go this far, or maybe I shouldn't touch on that? Or when you talk about the fine line, how do you get to that understanding of what that is?
Well, I think, I think you just have to be fair, and I mean, I think of all the arguments that we've all had, over politics over the last couple of years and incidences that have happened in our world. And, I just remember starting out as a TV reporter. I honestly, to be fair, Brian, I didn't know any other of my fellow reporters in the newsroom what political beliefs we had or anything like that. There was just a constant effort to be as unbiased as possible. It's hard when you travel with a team because, if they succeed, you're going to succeed, or your station that you're running or you're employed at is going to succeed. So everybody does well. So it really stinks when you're with a team all the time and they lose a lot. But it's great when they win a lot. But, I think that there is that fine line there. And I think that it's just an interesting thing that you have to decide what you're going to do. And above all, you just got to remain credible. And understand that you just have to stick to your principles and never deviate. And then you'll always be fair. You'll be transparent, but you're not doing anything that's wrong. And I gave you that Kobe example. Kobe would later on say, "You're hearing what's going on in that huddle. Are you telling people this?" And, and I would say, yeah, when it fits, so they were aware. I remember Phil Jackson. I mean, any coach that I was in the huddle with, I would ask them, "Are you okay if I'm in this huddle every time?" Phil was great about it. Don Nelson in Dallas and Avery Johnson, they were great about it as well. So I was fortunate to be with some coaches that they weren't afraid of someone being in there listening, which I'm very truly blessed at.
From those coaches to Bobby Knight, the coach, and you obviously worked on the Texas Tech radio network and calling basketball games. What sets him apart in terms of his personality traits, his demeanor, his rapport that you had, in contrast to any other high profile coach that you've worked with and that you know personally?
I think, I think it's just the understanding that what I'd seen through the media and through every other eyes was not what I found when he asked if I could do the television broadcast play-by-play for his final seasons. I think he wanted somebody that he was going to trust and that he could talk to. And so, obviously we did a weekly show on Sirius XM for 1 hour every weekend. And so we didn't talk just Texas Tech basketball. We talked about Bill Parcells and the Cowboys and Jack Nicklaus and all the things that he would want to talk about, Cardinals, baseball. But it came down to, I just saw a different side. I understood why the players at Indiana and Texas Tech and some of his other former players from the Olympics, why certain guys loved his style and thrived on it and why others didn't. And then just like a lot of people at the end of their career, he had mellowed a lot. I saw it in the final 2 weeks before he stepped aside. I knew the final night before he actually resigned because he said, "Dave, why don't you go down to the officials' locker room and knock on the door and see if they want to go grab something to eat afterwards?" And I thought, well, this will be interesting. So, having that one last, dinner together and laughs and everything, and then for him to retire the next day, that was pretty something else.
Would he ever, Dave, go to you after a game and talk to you about your performance? Obviously, he's talking to his players. But then say, "Hey, I was listening to your call here," and then you guys get into a discussion about that?
No, he never referred to it. I honestly, as much film as he watched, I don't know if he ever watched me with the volume up. I'm not sure. The first thing I would do when I put the headset down is I would literally walk to the court, off the court, and go sit in the locker room with him. He loved watching SportsCenter. He loved watching highlights of other games, but he never asked me anything that I had done or said on any of the games. And then finally he'd say, "You know what, I probably should go down and talk to the reporters." So he would finally go down and do his post-game press conference.
So not only were you working on air and there with Texas Tech and ESPN in Dallas and beyond, and also in local television, but to take on a management role as well. I know you were in Detroit and in LA. What compelled you to make that transition?
I think, Brian, we all we all probably had the same goals. I thought early on when I was a young broadcaster, I thought, I'm going to be the next, Jack Buck or whatever. I mean, I'm going to be calling play-by-play someday. And I'm fortunate to have gotten those chances. But along the way, I just ran into so many talent that I thought, I'm no longer competitive these guys are amazing. And so I think the further I got in sports talk radio, I just did not enjoy the daily doing a show 4 hours a day. The management side looked a lot better, the coaching of the talent, the finding talent, working with them. But I think it always helped that I had put in those reps. I was a talk show host nationally and on the local scene. So it was just kind of being able to flip the switch in my mind that I want to help the next generation. I want to see these guys succeed. And I worked with so many good talent and still see good talent in some of the ways that I still help ESPN by producing some of their national games on radio. I still see some of the most amazing play-by-play guys that we have out there. I don't know how they're getting all their training, but they're very versatile in what they're doing. So that's what I enjoyed about the management side.
To what extent and degree would you look and scout out talent and the medians in which you would do that?
Well, I mean, I really, from the onset of the internet, even when I was doing shows on the air in whatever market, I would always be listening to other ones on the internet while I was preparing for my show. And so I think just making sure that I knew who the talent were, talk to the people in various markets and understand that this person here in this market is probably going to be LA quality someday. And then understanding that what most people thought was going to be what a talk show host would be, then there had to be the not the normal one. And we had that in Los Angeles. Los Angeles, as you well know, Brian, is not a typical sports talk market. It's AM radio is still popular and what people listen to. And so, you didn't have to have guys that were like Philadelphia sports talk show hosts or Boston sports talk show hosts. You had to have guys that were going to be entertaining. And that's what happened when I was in Portland and Colin did the show right after me when I did Morning Drive, coming out of Colin Cowherd, he coming out of doing the evening news on the TV sports there. He was just so good at telling a story and going the entire segment by himself and making it compelling enough. So started to look for those kind of guys, the Marcellus Wiley and Max Kellerman and Stephen A. and Los Angeles and John Ireland and just, the guys like that who were being compelling even on days when the sports wasn't really the thing. They were just entertaining. They had an opinion and they backed it. And I think that you have to have some credibility as a talk show host too. You need to go to the locker rooms. You need to spend time around these players as well. So I really enjoyed looking for those type of people.
Why are you not surprised at the success that John Ireland has had in Los Angeles and beyond?
He's like saying that a really good basketball player is a gym rat. He's just always been there. He always had 3 jobs. He's always anchoring and reporting and sideline reporter and play-by-play. So, and being a talk show host. So, he's just one of those everything guys that tended to bring their all and just kept it on an even keel. Humble in many ways, but understanding how you could work and operate in a market the size of Los Angeles. Just a classic guy. And I mean, when the role came for when Spiro Ditas left the role for the Lakers, it was an easy decision for those of us that had the contract there at ESPN. So fortunately, the Lakers, in many ways, like a lot of teams, they trusted you when you would pick the talent or you would talk about talent. They always backed you on whoever because they knew that person would be so credible.
The Lakers trusted you to make those decisions. How have you, as you look at your career from a sports media perspective, how have you used the trust in yourself to make things happen in your business, to get your foot in the door, and to have at the bottom of everything a self-belief to take you places?
I think you just have to have there's a certain capability of having vision, being visionary, instead of thinking about today, what that person is going to be like, what I'm going to be like, a year, 2, 5 years down the road. And I think that's the key. How are they going to mature? How are they going to continue to get better as a talk show host or a play-by-play person? And and what's their work ethic. We've all made bad hires. I mean, I make hires in the nonprofit world now, and it's even tougher in these day and times with finding the right workers. But you got to be willing to make some mistakes, cut those losses when you can, and keep to your principles. You're going to find the right people that have the right work ethic.
I want to leave you with this. In how many respects and ways do you go back, Dave, and watch and listen to your earliest work? And even if you haven't, if you did, what are you thinking when you listen back at that?
I think I wish I would have known today, or sometimes I think I'm sure glad that Twitter and YouTube weren't around then, because of some of the things that either the mistakes we did, or the things that you got wrong. Because that was always the thing, is if I hosted a 4-hour Sports Center show on ESPN radio on a Saturday afternoon, many times, unless I was with Mel Kiper or another co-host, I could be solo, and it could be all various types of sports. And the thought of you're trying to prepare for that, it'll just drive you crazy if you think you're going to be Mr. Trivia and know everything that anybody could ever give you. You just have to know, here's the hot topics, here's what my thoughts are on it, what's yours, and you just have to kind of, and especially with interviews, you have to know, you have to know just how to ask the right things. And I think that that's one of the things that I enjoyed back then, was that we would check in on so many different sites to get on the spot reports back then. I just remember those days co-hosting with Mel Kiper. I mean, literally, I did not tell the guy down the audio line who I was going to ask him about. He's like, "Don't worry about it. Just ask me any name." And I mean, he really could. He could fire off something about any player that I ever named. And those are the kind of guys that you love to hear.
I think as sports radio listeners and watchers of content, you, Dave, are somebody that we love to watch and hear. And Dave, I appreciate you so much sort of giving us your take into the way in which you were able to carve out your career and your insight into how you did it, because it's always different than somebody else, but you've done it with, as you mentioned, this, I think, an even keel nature that has taken you to so many places and will continue to. And also the fact is, all you're doing with ALS, and you're doing it in your mom's honor, and you're so giving to so many as well. And that's what I take away from you more than anything is your giving nature. Dave, I'm Bryan Fenley. Thanks so much for doing this.
Well, thanks, Bryan. And you keep doing what you're doing. I mean, you're a guy that wears many hats, and that's probably seems busy at times. But if you're a young person watching this, which I hope you are, the inspiration is go for it, because there is not a limited amount of opportunities out there in the sports world or the news world or whatever. Just go after it. But the cream always rises to the top. The hardest workers always succeed.